Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Move this a little bit closer. My name's John Donnelly, and I'm the chairman of the National Press Club's Press Freedom Committee. I want to welcome everyone here today to the National Press Club, the world's leading professional organization for journalists. I'm also a reporter for Congressional Quarterly. Today's event on press freedom is co-sponsored by the committee that I chair, the Press Freedom Committee, and also the National Press Club's Journalism Institute, which is the nonprofit arm of the National Press Club, does professional development, and has been focusing more and more in the last couple of years on press freedom issues. So, and I want to tip my hat to Julie Hsu, the executive director of the Journalism Institute, and Kathy Kiley, who is the Press Freedom Fellow there. They did most of the work to set up today's event, and we have a terrific event today. I would like to wish you all a happy World Press Freedom Day, but it's not such a happy one, unfortunately. We find that journalism and journalists are under siege everywhere. Journalists are attacked, beaten, harassed, jailed, intimidated, and sometimes killed in so many countries. And I say journalism is under siege because, as people in this room know more than anyone, the very idea of objective fact is, from some quarters, under challenge. And we're going to hear a lot more about that today. I want to point out a couple things that we have done recently. First of all, today, the Press Club Journalism Institute and the Press Club has issued a statement on World Press Freedom Day. It's available in a paper copy on the back table. It's also, if it's not already, it's on our website, which is press.org. Speaking of the website, video of this event will be available there, perhaps as soon as later today. And I want to thank everyone who helped us out on that World Press Freedom Day statement. The Military Reporters and Editors is an organization that I am the new president of. We also signed on to that, so I had to give them a little plug. So another statement that we put out today that I want to bring to your attention concerns a particularly outrageous case of a man named Martine Mendez, who is a Mexican journalist. And Mexico is one of the deadliest places to be a reporter right now. And this young man, 26-year-old, was reporting on official corruption in Acapulco, and he was facing death threats. And so he sought asylum in the United States. And he has been unable to obtain asylum, unable to get in the country. He's been detained in a facility in, I believe, El Paso for, I think this is the 87th day. And he obviously, he has a reason to leave Mexico for his physical security, but he also has contacts here in the United States, including a U.S. citizen cousin. He has professional prospects here in the United States, and yet for some inexplicable reason, he is being held against his will. And we issued a statement a week or so ago about it, and we're issuing another one today because we don't want his case to be forgotten. I mentioned him, but he's one of so many people who need our help, and we need to keep talking about this. And so we're going to get started today, and I want to turn it over now to Jeff Ballou, who is the president of the National Press Club, to take the panel from here.
Thank you, John. I want to... Good morning, everyone. As John said, I'm Jeff Ballou, the 110th president of the National Press Club, news editor for the Americas for Al Jazeera English. And it's a privilege, and I'm sorry that John ran off the panel because I was going to give him a big pat on the back because John has worked so hard in the arena of press freedom for many years, and has, as chair of our press freedom team, really works tirelessly to make sure that we are putting the name of the club along arm in arm with the National Press Club Journalism Institute out there. Delphine, who is a part of that team, is also painfully aware of all the hard work and all the toiling we do to make sure that the principles of press freedom are practiced, or not just spoken of, but actually practiced worldwide. And we have, and I want to thank the staffs of the National Press Club and the National Press Club Journalism Institute, and in particular, Julie Hsu, Executive Director of the Institute, and Kathy Kiley, our first Press Freedom Fellow, who many people in this room know, and those of you who are watching also know as well. The Press Club's Executive Director, Bill Mccarran, and his wonderful staff works very hard to keep this club going year-round, to do so many things. Some 2,000 events come flowing through this club every single year, and his staff works tirelessly to make sure that those come off without a hitch. Members of my team are in the room. Andrea Edney of Bloomberg, who's our vice president, is sitting up over to my left, your right, and so many other folks that come together as the Board of Governors and our 3,100 members worldwide. It's a privilege and an honor to lead them, and to make sure that we embody the Constitution, which contains our job description. I wanted to quickly introduce the panel, and just a couple of housekeeping things. If you are tweeting, you can use the hashtag #NPCLive. A lot of us have our own Twitter handles. Mine is @NPCPresident. And I'm sure Twitter can very quickly dig up the Twitter handles of our distinguished members of the dais up here, so you can follow along. They're on the program. Boom. Kathy's always on it. And in addition to Kathy being an excellent colleague, she's also my fellow Pittsburgher. So I'm always going to point. Yes, indeed. I'm going to point that out, much to John's chagrin, because he's a diehard Nats fan. So, without further ado, I'm going to go to my left, your right. My good friend John Yearwood, who's the Executive Board Chairman of the International Press Institute, which is the world's oldest press freedom organization based in Vienna, Austria. John has been the chair of the board. John and I have worked together in various circles in the profession. He was a past national board member of the National Association of Black Journalists, and that's where he's past treasurer of that organization and past chair of its, our global affairs team there on that particular organization. Followed, Sharif Mansour, Middle East and North Africa Program Coordinator for the Committee to Protect Journalists. You've gotten some quite good boost this past year. You got Meryl Streep on your side. Not bad. And has done so much work, and just within the past few days released their annual report on attacks on the press, which is enlightening and depressing at the same time, because it always points out just how far we need to go to fight for press freedom. And to my immediate left, the award-winning Delphine Haglund, who just Monday night was feted at the museum as the James Foley Award winner for this year, and for her efforts on press freedom. Does great work here at the club alongside John, as I said earlier, on efforts on press freedom, and we can't be more happier for her as she is being properly celebrated for her hard work. To my right, let's see, Jennifer Hyman, who's the communications director for the International Women's Media Foundation, who also works very hard in the arena of freedom of the press. And lastly, Sharon Mashavi, who's senior vice president for new initiatives for the International Center for Journalists. And you, ICFJ, and you guys do wonderful work in terms of your fellows and bringing people who are in arguably very dangerous situations, just like CPJ does, and highlights their work and helps to fund them and helps to make sure that they can actually do their jobs hopefully without getting injured, harassed, or killed. And I've seen some of those at your annual dinner, and that's a great thing. We have styled ourselves the world's leading professional organization for journalists, but we couldn't help, since our name, the club here, name is the National Press Club, that we needed to turn our sights inward. Press freedom in the United States is under attack, and like no other time before in recent history. It's not the first time we've been under attack, but we definitely have some more than serious issues with our neighbor a couple of blocks down from the club, and those who believe in the tactics that he is employing. I want to, and when it comes time to questions and answers, wait for the mic to come around, identify yourself by name and affiliation, and we'll move quickly after that. I want to kick off the panel actually on the other side with you, Sharon, in the first issue that we can kick around. How does the United States compare to other countries, especially on how things have changed since the beginning of the last presidential campaign? Do U.S. reporters need to look to their colleagues abroad for tactics and methods to borrow so they can, since they find themselves in suddenly a more hostile environment? I mean, some best practices they can use?
Yes, but let me start by saying, obviously, things have deteriorated here, but there are still places that we're working. Venezuela, Turkey, Philippines, India. Lots of places are far worse than we are. So we're nowhere near that kind of. We haven't gone off a cliff yet at all. But I'm hearing two things. One from my international colleagues who are like, basically, welcome to the club. We have a lot to tell you and a lot to teach you. I've heard that Philippines startup journalist there. I was just spent a lot of time in India. Everyone's like, we actually have a lot to inform you. And I am seeing a lot of interest from U.S. journalists in understanding how international journalists work and operate in environments where access to data is harder, where there are pressures that are not necessarily legal, where there are lawsuits, whether it's for libel or for sedition. So there is very much a sense that there may be an anti-globalization sort of movement globally, but I think in journalism, we're seeing actually the opposite. I would say sort of more of a globalized effort, the fact that we're kind of all in this together and that there are a lot of lessons to be learned.
Can I jump in?
Sure,
Sorry. Because actually last week we released our annual Press Freedom Index, which is a way to rank countries according to the level of press freedom. And I just want to say that what we observed, one of the trends of the year is that the U.S. is not the leading democracies who has seen such media bashing and such new aggressive rhetorics. And so now the U.S. is ranked at the 43rd position in our index, which is a fall of 2 places. But we saw that Canada also has seen a deterioration. The UK has seen a deterioration. So just before jumping completely in the U.S., I just wanted to bring back little bit of perspective to see that actually what we have seen in the U.S., we have seen really similar concerning trends in leading democracies as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say, I'm a former Beijing-based journalist, and so, it's really important for journalists in the United States to be tenacious, to not be cowed, to not be afraid, because you'd be surprised in some of the most repressive countries in the world, like China, where there is this presumption of zero press freedom, how much news actually makes it into the fore. And, I think that editors are a little bit more creative about how stories are contextualized. The important story may appear on page 25, not on page 1. But I think that it becomes more incumbent on consumers of the news to really look and think more clearly. And I think that in more repressive countries, it's not just incumbent on the journalists and the editors, but on the consumers of the news themselves to really look and see through the muddle that's happening. And we're increasingly seeing that in the United States. I think that's really the key thing, is that people have to be more proactive in terms of how they seek out news, and journalists be more tenacious in actually getting those important stories to the fore.
Mansour.
I just wanted to add a little bit of the perspective here, because we're trying always to compare the U.S. in terms of how it stands within the world, but also how the U.S. as a world power projects some of the values, the morals, support of some of the big issues that has to do with press freedom. And the First Amendment encapsulates a lot of those issues, including not just freedom of the press, freedom of, to organize, freedom of a religious belief, and all those are connected. So when you have a hostile government toward the press, most likely it's a hostile government towards minorities, towards dissidents of all kinds, including political and non-political actors. So when we are watching what could protect journalists, it's also what could protect everyone else, including people in the room who advocate for other issues of human rights. So the point I want to make sure is that, yes, there will be laws, there will be negotiations about how the U.S. meets some of those challenges, and some of the results that comes out of it is going to impact a lot of people abroad. For example, the issue of fake news, something that the current president have used regularly on Twitter, publicly, is now being repeated by both some democratic and non-democratic governments. China, Russia, Bashar al-Assad, Hosni Mubarak, even Tayyip Erdogan. All those people are using the same line that and aligning themselves with the current administration.
John?
Well, thank you. Well, Jeff, first of all, let me just take a minute to thank you for the invitation and for being here and being part of, I think, this very important discussion on this very important day, as many of us sit here enjoying certain levels of freedom. Many of our colleagues are being held under inhumane conditions all around the world, including IPI board member Kadri Gürsel in Turkey. And hopefully when the next World Press Freedom Day comes around a year from now, Kadri and many of his colleagues will be released and will be free. A couple of points that I want to make. What we have been seeing in this country is, of late, is something that, as we've heard, many countries and many journalists around the world have been dealing with for quite some time. Not too long ago, I was in Haiti, and I was talking to the editor and publisher of the major newspaper there, and invited him to an event we were doing in Germany, and where we would be talking about some of these issues. And he laughed and said, well, finally, as you look at what's been going on in the U.S., welcome to our world. And this is what we've been dealing with. But he also said, look, we've dealt with this with the previous president of Haiti, and he's gone, and we're still here. So if there is any silver lining in all of this, there is hope. But one of the areas, though, that have really, really deep concern for us, as whether it's IPI, RSF, and others, as we travel around the world and hold these meetings with journalists in various countries, one of the first places that we stop is the U.S. Embassy, because we can always be assured of some support, whether it's the U.S., Canadian, or British missions in the various countries. What we are deeply concerned about now is the level of support that we'll be getting from the doors and the interior of the U.S. mission when we go there, because there no longer seems to be that commitment in Washington to stand with the journalists who are being prosecuted in some of these countries around the world. So what it, to some extent, weakens our hand as we try to work to get some of these journalists released and to bring attention to what's being done and what's being said. And the final point is, as we also look at some of these leaders, and some may say members of a rogues gallery, come to Washington, you're not seeing the kind of availability to the media that you may have seen in other administration. For example, Al-Sisi was here recently. I don't remember press availability. We all know that Erdogan is coming in a few weeks. I'm not seeing anything that says there'll be a press availability to that, so that journalists can ask them tough questions about what's going on in terms of human rights in their countries. So I think that in the extent that we're seeing this happening, it's weakening any effort that we're trying to make on the part of journalists, so that we can help journalists who are being persecuted and being jailed in countries around the world.
Is anybody else seeing that trend, a sense of a fear of a lack of a diplomatic safety net or anything else that John?
Less actually than I would have thought at this point. I think there are still, again, it's probably mission by mission, but we're seeing still a lot of support from local embassies in various parts of the world. So I think what's happening is you have a message from the top, and I think what we're still witnessing in many aspects is whether how much that's going to trickle down, and is it going to be uniform. I think that's still to be determined.
Yeah, and I think part of what we're seeing, and thankfully, in many of these embassies, the people who are still there are holdover from the previous administration. When
Career diplomats and
Yeah.
things of that nature.
And their
exactly.
careers, so they
So
might
once-
very
yeah.
well stay. So it's really hard to tell.
But there are already two bad signs here, because first of all, the State Department for the first time did not make a big promotion about the human rights report this year. There was not support from the top to a lot of the human rights programming that we're seeing being cut. And that's an issue, because these are reports that includes issues of press freedom as well, and are frequently quoted what happens to journalists and media outlets in those countries. And today, I haven't seen anything from the administration on Press Freedom Day. This is a day that would be celebrated in many ways by previous presidents, and would be highlighted at least as ceremony.
Is anybody banking on that statement today? But Monsieur, earlier you raised a different point that I want to throw out to everybody else, and that's the notion of copycat behavior. People, the sort of, if he can do it, well, hell, I can round up I can do an Erdogan and round up a thousand people at one clip, and nobody's going to bat an eye because we're a trusted ally. Anybody else seeing that?
Yeah, actually, in France, during the campaign, the election campaign, which is still going on, that's the first time that we have seen so much media bashing, and journalists being hissed, and even didn't get access to some meeting. It was really the first time that the highest candidate were criticizing so violently journalists, and so and we have seen that also in the UK, and so it's really a feeling that, if Trump can do it, if the US can do it, let's go for it.
Anything else?
Yeah, and it goes beyond anecdotal, because IPI has done studies that looked at particularly Turkey and what's happened when Erdogan and his supporters start bashing the media. You really start seeing that members of the media were physically attacked after, and that's a part of our fear that's going to start happening over here because of some of the comments that have been coming out of the White House and elsewhere. So that when that starts, what impact it's going to have on the physical safety of journalists. And I was talking to one journalist, a senior editor in Trinidad and Tobago not too long ago, and she was telling me that because of some of the comments that were coming out of the U.S., and as you know, we export everything, our music, our culture, and our rhetoric. And they're seeing, and in fact, she has had to send a security guard with her journalists on some assignments because of the backlash against journalists, because of some of what we've been seeing. So it's something that that's really concerning a lot of us, and to some extent, you saw that during the campaign, where journalists were
ahead,
attacked
feel free to
by
jump in.
some of the supporters.
I think that there's a slight ray of sunshine. It's a very slight ray, but I'll say it anyway, which is that journalists also are being galvanized the same way you're seeing in the U.S., that the sense of mission is stronger, the sense that the media as a group globally is under attack. We are seeing journalists saying, I want to do this. We're seeing a lot more interest in investigative journalism, a lot more help cries for support, for collaboration, for all of these things. So there, at the same time that the attacks are increasing, there's nothing like being threatened as well, for better or worse, to galvanize folks.
Yeah, and I really want to highlight your point, because I think I never seen so much collaboration between the media, the Press Freedom Organization here in the US, but at the global level, to work together, to put our strength together, because and that's definitely a very positive consequence.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, you're about to go.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, there is, though, so much violence and harassment against journalists. And one of the things the International Women's Media Foundation has really focused on is violence and harassment against women in the media. More than 2/3 of female journalists have experienced some sort of physical threats, harassment, detention, various types of issues. And we have increasingly seen trolling, seeing other kinds of intimidation of journalists, men and women. But, we all heard the Megyn Kelly's, situation. And by disparaging journalists, it does have a chilling effect. And so we are increasingly seeing that trend in the United States as well. Thankfully, it hasn't risen to the point where we're seeing mass, attacks against journalists in the United States, and God help us if we get to that point. But it is chilling, and we are seeing those kinds of trends and tactics that we've seen traditionally more around the world here in the United States.
Do you, and you can go up and down, and jump in as you see fit. There are a lot of cases that are not just on the national level, but happening on the state and local level. Mm-hmm. Do you find yourselves, your phones ringing, your emails pinging from local reporters? Like that incident in North Carolina where the gentleman was booted out of the State House gallery when they were when the whole battle between the supermajority Republican legislature and the incoming governor. Over whether or not they're going to strip him of his powers. Do you find that yourselves getting those phone calls from within the country?
You want to start?
I'm Egyptian and I work on the Middle East, but that's also a challenge because a lot of the journalists who are coming to the U.S. from my region, including the 8 countries that are always debated for travel bans, are very worried about their safety, their information being tracked and monitored at the border. And some of them were sent back, and some of them were forced to open their phone and leave their laptop now at home so they cannot do work. So these are things that, it's going to happen not just against local journalists, minority journalists, Muslim journalists, journalists who are here as foreign press. Those are people as well that are going to be impacted by this.
So I just want to say that actually we put our strengths together, CPJ, RSF, Reporters Committee, and any press freedom organization to be ready to monitor and to gather all this data of these local American journalists in the state, in the town halls we face violation. And so we are gathering this. I hope that this collective website will be up in the coming months. To answer your question, yes and no. At the same time, we receive there's not been an explosion of cases, to be short. Mm-hmm. But we are investigating some rare threats in California, in very small town. There's definitely a lot of issue at the border for journalists being searched, arrested, questioned, visa denied, even for British, Spanish, and so on. But that, I want to say, is an issue that was already here under the Obama administration. So I have to say we are here to monitor. We have seen some peak of things that didn't happen before, but not an explosion.
Yeah, similar. We work a lot with minority media in the U.S., and I'm hearing the same kinds of anecdotal things about online trolling, racism, things like that we've always heard. I don't know if people are more sensitive to it now, and there's a sense that this is the atmosphere. So we're going to we're gonna pay more attention to it. So it is hard to figure out what is anecdotal, what is feeling that this is the environment we're in versus really what actually is happening.
I think there's a mic that's going to start traveling. We can get that out there now for questions. And before we Delphine, you wanted to throw something out there?
Sorry, yes, because in your first question, you asked about best practices.
Yes.
That maybe we could, the American journalists. I think some of the best practices are still the same because it's always the journalists should protect themselves and their sources against surveillance, online surveillance. That still remain the same. That's the same best practices if you report in the U.S. or if you report in more conflict areas. So I just wanted to go back to that.
Well, that's fine. Before we go to, sorry, go ahead, John. Get your hands up if you want to ask a question, so I know where the mic's going to travel while John's talking.
Just a really quick point on your previous question. I think what you'll be seeing is, in terms of what's happening here in this country, a number of free press organizations forever we've been largely focus on what's happening outside of the U.S. You'll see, and I've privy to some information where you'll be seeing even more, and some major events that will be happening here in the months ahead to focus on what's been going on in the U.S. But I think, and we talked about, where the silver line is. One of the great things about the U.S. is we're not just seeing the larger national and international free press organizations. There are a number of smaller local organizations that are also doing really terrific work, and they are as energized now as they have ever been. And as I talk to people around the world and they look at the U.S., and the U.S. has some of these safety nets that many countries don't have. So despite everything that you see going on, a lot of people feel that, at the end, the U.S. will be okay because it has all of these organizations that are all essentially fighting in the same direction in terms of preserving press freedom, whether it's at the national level. And in some cases, there were some issues in Florida this week where there were some victories won there, partly because of the work of some of the local organizations.
In other words, they were sitting on a body of Supreme Court cases, the Constitution, and a bunch of other things that are fail safes. Right. Do you find that you're having to raise money? I don't know if people or reporters are out there fearing that they're going to be jailed and they need some bail money or some lawyers to help them out. You find yourselves collectively talking to each other to help on that regard. Anybody?
Well, the International Women's Media Foundation is part of the Journalists in Distress Network, which is a consortia of 18 different organizations that are providing emergency support to journalists in crisis, and that includes in the United States. And sometimes it's things like, security in a really physical sense of flak jackets, of actually having proper body armor, of going to a hostile environment and first aid training, which most journalists don't have access to. And increasingly, because we have so many freelancers who are unprotected, really trying to provide that support. But it's also for things like asylum, for psychosocial support after sexual assault. So these efforts have already been in place, but they're certainly not, the U.S. is certainly part of that, in terms of journalists really needing that kind of emergency support, and that hasn't dwindled.
I have to say that I think just a few days after the election, I had some major law firm coming to us saying, we want to work pro bono for you.
Is anybody else getting those kind of sort of free big law firm offers saying, hey, we're going to give away our billable hours? I think there's a lot of folks that...
But let me just...
Meryl Streep standing up at the Golden Globe saying, hey, let's...
And in fact, I was going to sort of make a point about that, is that we're all always looking for support, whether it's financial and otherwise. And,
we won't turn this into a public broadcast. No. But yes,
but I think that's a really important point, because a lot of the work that we all have been doing in IPI's case for some 6 to 7 years, we could not have been done without the kind of support we've gotten from the public.
I think we had a hand up. Hi, our Pulitzer Prize winner. Or one of them in the room.
Well, thank you. You were asking about are people reaching out at the local level on press freedom issues, and I'd note that in the last month, the Iowa Freedom of Information Council has doubled its annual budget. They had a $20,000 annual budget. They've received donations in the last month that have doubled their annual budget from around the country because of work they did with us on this work that we won the Pulitzer for. So there is a lot of stuff going on in the United and what we're finding is that we need to raise money for the Iowa Freedom of Information Council to hire attorneys to get these records for us now that public officials are refusing to release records more and more. It's getting worse, not better. And so yes, there's been a real explosion. People from all over Iowa and all over the country are sending in donations to the Iowa Freedom of Information Council, IFOIC.org.
Tom, tell people who you are, first of all.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Art Cullen. I'm with the Storm Lake Times in Storm Lake, Iowa.
And winner of the Pulitzer Prize. Well, and another one just walked in here. I saw Terry Samuel just walk in, the new deputy managing editor of National Public Radio, as of after this week when he leaves the Post, who also has a Pulitzer behind his name. Anybody else want to? Is there a question over here? Yes.
Hey, good morning.
Identify yourself, please.
All right. My name is DJ Caulfield. I had served as a reporter in the New York metropolitan area many years ago. I also did some tours with press operations here for agencies in Capitol Hill, but that's all behind me. My question is this. I carry around a document that is a United Nations document, Declaration on Human Rights, and I read that every so often. Is there an equivalent single document that establishes global journalist rights?
Well, there are a couple. I know UNESCO and other organs of the UN have also passed some different, different rules. But I know right now through Al Jazeera we've been working on a new declaration that will be coming into the UN system soon. That we'll be working with others to try to get passed. It was worked on by a number of journalists around the world. And you'll probably be hearing more of that, more about that in the months ahead. So so there are a couple of things that are happening, and that happens to be one of them. It's a combination of the rules that you have, but it just expands it a bit more.
So the Article 19 of the Universal Declaration remains really the basic of the protection of press freedom. Also, according to international law, journalists are considered civilians and are protected as civilians. There are major UN Security Council resolution on the protection of journalists. It's Resolution 1739 or 2222, which are actually very strong protection of journalists even in conflict. What we see is that they're not really applied on the field. And we have been, I think all of us are part of many push for the UN to do a better job to implement this very strong resolution. And actually, we have led a coalition to push the UN to do a better job. And we met Ban Ki-moon last June. We met Antonio Guterres, the new UN Secretary General, in February. And he is ready, I think, to really try to implement change at in his own cabinet. And he's ready to really commit that his cabinet will take the safety of journalists very carefully. And we are working with CPJ and actually the National Press Club on this very closely. So a lot of things are happening, and we definitely hope and believe that the UN can play a better job for itself, but also for the member states to push them to do a better job.
Believe it or not, time has flown by, and it's time to wrap up this panel. But before we go, I just want to hit one more lightning round. Is there one good next step for journalists that we need to take in defense of press freedom, either globally or in this case, since our focus today is on the United States? Is there one thing that journalists need to do within the United States alongside your respective organizations?
I mean, it's a general thing, but let's go back for a second. I think we're at a perfect storm, and you're having all of this sort of attacks and fake news, but you're at a low level of trust for journalists everywhere. You don't have a connection between journalists and their communities. And the process of building that up, I think, is key to helping to combat some of this. And that's an issue everywhere, not just in the U.S. Trump, Duterte, Modi in India, they all, social media they speak directly to the people. And we're struggling and fighting against that as well. So I think that there's obviously, and folks are doing great work on the legal side and this, but what journalists can do as a group and a body on a daily basis, I think, is each individual journalist can really try to figure out ways to build that community, build that engagement, and rebuild the sense of trust.
Sharon?
Jennifer.
Thank you, Sharon. Jennifer, sorry.
It's all right. I would say that, one of the really critical things that needs to happen is a greater investment in regional and local news, because that has really eviscerated the public's understanding of how the national level policies are affecting their lives, and it makes it much harder to distinguish what is real and what is fake. So I think that that's one of the most important things right now, is ensuring that there's a diversity of voices, stories, and perspectives in the news so that people can really engage. We're obviously advocates to ensure there's also diversity of gender and of race and of sexual orientation, because we need that. If you only see the news through one angle, you're not going to really be informed citizens, and media can't be what it was intended to do. But certainly as a first step, we've really got to invest more in regional and local news so that it really hits home for the people who are reading it.
Thank you, Jennifer. Delphine?
As I repeat all the time, I don't want us to be seen as the journalists who defend the journalists and in this close circle, but just to remember why we do that, it's just because the press freedom is the freedom that allows us to verify what are the other freedom and to hold the powerful interest accountable. And we see that even if the media are criticized, if there's a lack of trust, if there's growing threats, growing challenges for the media industries, there's definitely this interest in the population for this, and we see that it's not diminishing, so that's definitely a positive aspect to not forget.
Thank you. Mansour.
I would say that in times like this of change and anxiety, resilience is the most important part. Journalists have to make sure that they are not burned by ongoing events and build enough unity among each other so that they are not divided. If they are threatened, doesn't matter who threatens, they get the same defense. That's what I think is the most important lesson from other divided press that was forced into silence from other countries around the world.
John.
Two things. First of all, I think we need to listen to each other and cooperate with each other as we're doing today. I mean, we were involved, many of us, in forming this new organization called ACOS that works with freelancers. And I think freelancers are better today because of the formation of that organization to work with freelancers who are going into the field in dangerous situations. One of the things that we've done, for example, is work to get them insurance, which is something that they've been trying to do for decades. So one thing is to continue to work together. The second thing is to listen and talk to our peers and colleagues outside the country and see how they have been able to keep going despite the real tremendous pressures from government. For example, not too long ago, I was in Zambia, where the government, a few weeks before the election, had shut down the one opposition paper that was there. And what did the journalists do? Well, they went outside and on the sidewalk set up a mobile newsroom and continued publishing. And I was there when the paper came out. I don't know where it was published, but where it was printed, but people came in droves to get the paper, despite what the government wanted to do. So there are wonderful lessons out there that we can learn from, and I think if we look at what others have done, I think we'll be fine.
That's right. I want to thank everybody on the panel this morning. You have in your handouts how to follow everybody here on Twitter and their websites and so forth. You have my own thoughts are in my brand new president's blog that you can see on Press Freedom on www.press.org. And I want to thank Kathy Kiley, who helped organize today's panel, Julie Hsu, the Executive Director of the National Press Club Journalism Institute, Bill Mccarran, the Executive Director of the National Press Club, and my fellow officers who are here in the building, Andrea Snyder, Andy, who is our club Vice President. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, everybody, we have a very big panel here, so I'm going to get started. I'm Kathy Kiley. I have been a member of the National Press Club for more years than I care to admit, and I am the Press Freedom Fellow for the National Press Club's Journalism Institute. I want to be a broken record here about the case of Martine Mendez. This is a young man from Mexico whose only crime is having exposed corruption in his own town. He was threatened with death. The immigration service here has concluded he has a credible fear of returning home. Nonetheless, they are still detaining him. They are asking that this person who's seeking asylum prove community ties. The Border Center for Journalists and Bloggers have offered Martine an internship so he can continue doing his work on the border, which would help both the United States and Mexico. We call on the Trump administration, we call on the Justice Department and the Immigration Service to release him, to parole him. The organizations calling for this today are the National Press Club's Journalism Institute, Reporters Without Borders, the Border Center for Journalists and Bloggers, and the International Center for Journalists. I really want to thank all of these organizations for their help in pressing Martine's case. He's 26 years old. He spent his 26th birthday in a detention center in El Paso. I really hope he doesn't have to spend much more time there. So anything we can do to support his effort, we will, and I would hope that anyone who has any leverage with the U.S. government would send the same message. So I just wanted to start with saying that. I also wanted to say that this is a very big panel. I hope will be very rambunctious. One reason it's such a big panel is that I wanted to really represent the non-monolith that people talk about when they talk about the media. We have everybody here from the Washington Post, soon to be NPR, and Terry Samuel, to Art Cullen, our Pulitzer Prize winning editor of a reporter in Storm Lake, Iowa. So we represent very different facets of the media, but I think we all stand for the same thing today, and that is freedom of the press. And so I wanted to start, and I want the panelists to just jump in and kind of say a little bit about yourself. You have bios out at the front, but I want people to just kind of jump in and have a conversation here. You're reporters. I expect you to interrupt and not wait to be called on. But I do want to start with this question that kind of picks up on what some of the folks on our last panel ended with, and that is the importance of building trust with our readers and the importance of having roots in the community. People like to call us the media elite. Do you feel like you're part of a media elite, and is there such a thing? And how do we get past that to build relationships with your readers and your sources? And I want to start with Art, because he flew all day yesterday to get here, and he represents a journalist in a very small community. And I want to talk to us a little bit about your publication and how you interact with your community and what it's like to write tough stories about that community but still have trust.
Well, thanks, Kathy. Again, my name's Art Cullen. I'm with the Storm Lake Times in Storm Lake, Iowa. Storm Lake is a town, the census says it's about 10,000. We believe it's closer to 15,000 with a large number of immigrants who work in meatpacking. About 88% of our elementary school are children of color, mainly from Latin America. And my brother John founded the newspaper in 1990. There was an incumbent chain-owned newspaper from Hillbilly Holler in Missouri that was running the incumbent paper, and John tried to buy it, and they insulted him. So he, being Irish, he walked out the door and said, "I'm starting my own paper, damn it." And so he founded the Storm Lake Times as a weekly in June of 1990, and it's called Buena Vista County's hometown newspaper. That's our motto. And so, you know, we normally don't write Pulitzer Prize winning kind of material. It's mainly obituaries and pictures of dogs and crashes and fires and babies on the front page, and that's what we do. And that's how we maintain contact with our community. And so somebody was interviewing one of my old redneck friends who I shoot pool with twice a week, and asking him, you know, what do you think of the Storm Lake Times and their editorial positions? And he said, their editorials are crap. I don't read them. But he said, the rest of the paper I like just fine. So we had just won a Pulitzer, and he said, their editorials are crap. But I shoot pool with him twice a week. He's a Trump voter. I was a Clinton and Obama voter, so we understand each other, and we have great friendships, and he's telling me what local construction projects are coming up, and so, I mean, that's how you maintain contact with your community, and you run pictures of their kids in the paper, and you run if somebody brings in an obituary that takes up a half page, we run it. And if it has a picture of them with a dog, that's even better. So we feel if it's important enough for them to bring it in the office, it's important enough for us to put it in the newspaper unedited, unless they have bad language or libelous statements. So that's how we run the newspaper.
I'm going to ask Art to answer the question at the top. Do you feel like part of the media elite?
And that's the Washington Post.
I used to run a 1973 Harris Cottrell V15A web press until we got rid of it in May, and I wore overalls to work, key bib overalls made in the U.S., and Red Wing boots made in Minnesota. And no, I do not feel part of the media elite. And although people in Storm Lake may think that we're part of some sort of and we're getting some fake news blowback now. Seriously, even in Storm Lake, it's getting down to that level. Our state representative won't speak to us because he says we won't give him a fair shake, even though we run every one of his weekly legislative newsletters verbatim, where he complains about the minority Democrats and how they're screwing everything up. And so, I guess maybe some people think we're part of the media elite because I have a college degree, but no, I don't feel like I shoot snooker with these guys twice a week, and we swear and spit, and no.
Tracy, do you shoot pool and swear and spit in Berkeley? And
no. So I'm Tracy Taylor. I'm one of the founders of a small, maybe not quite as small as these guys, but we have eight of us on the team in total. Only 4 or 5 of whom do reporting. But Berkeley side covers Berkeley, California, and so we are the West Coast elite, I guess. We don't shoot pool, but what we do, which I think does earn the trust of our community, is we go to every city council meeting, and trust me, Berkeley City Council meetings are something to behold. Yeah. They go on for hours and hours, and we're there from 7 through midnight every week or every other week, whenever they happen. We live tweet them. We live tweet zoning school board meetings. We live tweet zoning board meetings. We are there. We're watching. People are, because we're there. I think people realize we are in the community. We're with them. We're not just observing them. We're very much part of them. We go to every, community gatherings, neighborhood meetings, crime meetings, and I think that just that presence alone builds trust. So.
Abby and Jonathan, I want to ask you, because you represent regional reporters in Washington. Do you feel, how do you interact with your audiences back home and your sources?
So I have quite a lift in that I have the 38-member Texas delegation, which includes the Senate Majority Whip, a former presidential candidate, 7 chairmen, and the ideological spectrum of Sheila Jackson Lee and Louis Gohmert. So it's a lot. And I try to build trust with the members, but I also lean heavily on people not from Texas. I mean, there's non-Texans in the room when things are happening and powerful Texans are doing stuff. And so, that's sort of how I approach this. With the audiences, I am a native Texan. I grew up there. I'm 7th generation. I went to the University of Texas. So I do have kind of a sense, it's a massive state, and each day I am still stunned by how large it is. But for instance, the F-35 tweets in December, that was, to a lot of people was probably a one-off, like, oh, Trump's tweeting about this. Well, my hometown is Fort Worth, which is where the F-35 is manufactured. And so when I was home for Christmas, I basically just walked around downtown Fort Worth, and lo and behold, there is a model of the F-35 that people have lined up for hours to take their photo with. And it was just this realization that this is our version of West Virginia coal. And so it's just, I try as hard as I can to connect a chairman, a president, a presidential candidate to people I know in the state.
Do you find, and maybe Jonathan has been a regional reporter and represents the Regional Reporters Association, and Jonathan and I go way back. So I wonder if either or both of you could answer, but especially Jonathan with your perspective, are you experiencing the same kind of thing that Art talked about? Are sources kind of copycatting the Trump attitude toward the press? And do you find people are less willing to talk to you now?
Well, some of it is people who don't like what you're writing are using the Trump thing and fake news. We're all grouped together. You know, it's the media. You know, with all due respect, that Rachel Maddow doesn't do what I do. Hugh Hewitt doesn't do what I do, but we're all the media together. And with the sins of them are being visited on us, the sins of BuzzFeed, which violated journalistic ethics by running unsubstantiated attacks on Trump, gave him all the weapons and all the Republicans, all the weapons to go after all the media. And we've got to be careful on that, and we're paying the price. But the other problem is, on some of that is, so you know, I sound like an old fogey. I've been in Washington for 30 years, but
You
social
are an
media.
old fogey, John.
I remember, you know, in the House, in the Senate, there was a lot more personal interaction before, where you could go out to talk to somebody and they would talk to you, and a lot of that is restricted now because somebody's afraid that somebody down the road is going to take us. A lawmaker's going to misspeak, and all of a sudden it's going to be tweeted out. And so you try to build personal trust with people, and it's people that I've covered I covered in Albany 40 years ago, who are now in the Congress, and I talk to, and they're good sources of mine. But then I'm trying to talk to them, and we're just, you know, schmoozing, and somebody else comes out to try to throw some question out with the tape recorder, and a person's going to, you know, misspeak something, and all of a sudden it's tweeted all over the place, and that person's going to be a lot more reticent to talk to us. And that, I think, it's one of the biggest problems.
Fred, what's it like in Mississippi? And you've had to reschool some people, right, about what it means to be covered?
Absolutely. Even myself, just having spent 30 years here at USA Today as a reporter and editor, and then going back to Mississippi, was just kind of stunned at the lack of access. Domestic violence bill is being considered by a judiciary committee. We're trying to find out how it's going to be handled. And the chairman of the judiciary committee won't tell us who's on the subcommittee that's handling the bill. So the bill dies. There's never a hearing held. We can't cover it. Last summer, we took our brand new, fresh out of college reporter and sent him to the State Transportation Commission. They hadn't been covered for years. They told him that the meetings weren't open. So I get this phone call saying, hey, they're telling me I can't stay and cover this meeting. I said, yes, you can. They can go into executive session for these reasons, but you sit there and you cover the meeting. So there's this kind of re-education of the public officials that, hey, you're a public official. You're working for the public. We're doing what I like to call public service journalism. We are there because the public can't be there. We are there to record and hold accountable the public officials in their public duties. So to me, I was just kind of stunned at some of these quick things. And I can give you one more example. The state legislature commissioned with a private contractor to do some research on a new formula for education funding. We asked to see the contract. The administrative committee of the legislature met and passed a new rule that no contracts entered into by the legislature would be public record. So the Attorney General pointed out that while they were trying to exempt themselves from open records, they had not exempted themselves from the state transparency law, and that requires that all contracts be public. So then we got that, after that came down from the Attorney General, we got the contract, which had nothing in it. I mean, even the consultant was going, I don't understand why they're holding on to this thing. All it had was the money and what we're doing.
The next one will.
Right, right.
Well, that's the point. You know, we're talking about they're public officials, and our job, and I believe that's why it is the First Amendment, is our job is to represent the public. And when you hear about something like media elite, it's an attempt to delegitimize our role. Oh, yeah, they're just these elite people. No, we are the public's representative. We have space in the Capitol. We have space in state houses because the public can't be there. And our job is to represent the public and the public's right, defend the public right now, and tell the public what their officials are doing.
But the polls say that the public doesn't like journalists. So what is to be done about that?
The public's never liked journalists.
Right. Well, I'm Dan Shelley. I'm the incoming executive director of the Radio Television Digital News Association, and I slightly disagree with that. There have been moments in our history when we have been held in much higher regard than we are now. But I can tell you that members of our organization, and we're the world's largest organization devoted exclusively to electronic and digital journalism at the national, but predominantly the local level, all across the country. And we're hearing from our members across the country that, yeah, we need to reach out and do a better job of educating the public as to why we exist and the community service that we're providing to them by being at the council meetings and being in the state houses and gaining access to the contracts and all of that. But it goes beyond just that. It's not just an increasing issue, a new attitude, if you will, on the part of public officials who feel somewhat emboldened by this enemy of the people mindset that has emanated from a couple of blocks away. It's not just that. It's members of the public who don't like us, who have also been emboldened by that rhetoric from a couple of blocks away from where we sit today. And so part of what we're trying to do as an organization is a two-pronged approach. Reach out to our members and members of local, predominantly news organizations and industries and constituencies to make sure that they are sending a good message to the public about why we exist. We're here to work for you. We're sitting in the council meetings or the legislative committee meetings, so you don't have to. And here we also showcase through our Edward R. Murrow Awards and other ways outstanding examples of what I call responsible electronic and digital journalism. The Texas Tribune is a multiple Edward R. Murrow Award winner, and they do a phenomenal job of, in a bipartisan way, covering events of Texas that are relevant politically and otherwise to their audience. So that's just one example. We also have to combat as best we can what many of our members are seeing at the local level, which is an increased vitriol against reporters on the street just doing their jobs. And that ranges from more vitriolic Facebook comments and reactions to, I met just last week with the general counsel of a large television company who said that they are actually seeing the phrase enemy of the people written into legal documents, particularly cease and desist orders that their stations receive for running certain stories or certain pieces of information or images or whatever. It ranges from that to actual physical confrontations on the street at a much higher level than there were just 2 years ago, prior to the start of the 2016 presidential campaign.
And your members would be much more vulnerable because they're visible, right? Their equipment makes them more visible.
That's correct. And these personal confrontations in and of themselves that we're hearing about range from just verbal assaults to, in some cases, reporters and photographers at local television stations being spat upon and having objects thrown at them merely for trying to take pictures of demonstrations, or, and in at least a few cases, photographers have been arrested standing on public property filming anti-Trump protests, taping anti-Trump protests. So we are seeing what started as the most dishonest people in the room being at the national level, and now that's permeating into the local level. And there's a particular concern among our members that in the 2018 midterm election cycle, the members of Congress in particular, but also local elected officials who rode the coattails of the movement that resulted in the results of the 2016 presidential election, they're worried that those local officials will begin to use that same rhetoric to keep their jobs in Congress and the state legislatures. So it's becoming quite pervasive across the country in local areas.
Yeah, I would just jump in on this issue of likability and trustworthiness. I think at the local level, there's an opportunity to do two things, which maybe it's harder to do at a national level. And that is to involve our community at Berkeleyside is very much part and parcel of our reporting. That's not to say they do our reporting, they're not citizen journalists in that way, but we get, I would say, half of our tips, story tips come from our community. We are sent daily. We get tweets. They're very much they're emailing us, they're phoning us, they're texting us, they're telling us what's going on the streets and being our eyes and ears. And I think that sense that they are part of this endeavor, that they are doing they are part of the community journalism, it immediately builds that bond of trust. And I also think another thing that you can do, which is fairly common, but I think maybe sometimes forgotten, is news tends to be bad news, right? If it bleeds, it leads. We're sometimes accused of doing too much crime journalism. People don't want to know about the crime in their city, even though they do. Secret they do, but they don't. It's a sort of, yeah. So I think what we do, and I'm sure others do this too, but we try and balance that by telling some good stories, telling the good news. If somebody gets in a terrible accident, we might do a really in-depth profile of their recovery, and we might do a report on the mail carrier who's retiring after 40 years of serving the same neighborhood. And these are very local stories, but they're feel-good stories. People feel that we're not just telling them the bad stuff that's going on. And so those two elements, I think, can contribute to people feeling a little bit warmer towards the journalists and maybe less hostile.
I'll jump in just sort of along that line. I've never been cut off by any of the members of the delegation. I mean, I don't know if y'all are aware, the press has pretty great access at the U.S. Capitol. We can grab any of these members, and if you know their habits, you can pretty much pin them down to ask an uncomfortable question. I've written not positive profiles of some of these members, and they're still open and they'll talk to me. But I think one of the things that kind of on her point, specifically in Washington, there is so much snark in Twitter. And I just don't make fun of the people I cover. I let my stories speak for themselves and I'll give context, but I just don't, I think that's why they'll still talk to me, is that they know that it may not be great, but at least they'll have a chance to get their point of view into my story, and the rest of it will be there too. That probably won't be very pleasant, but I do think that I just try to be very, very cautious in my social media and the sort of commentary I make, because I am a straight reporter and I may have funny thoughts in my head or oh wow, but I do try to treat every single one of these members seriously, because they do represent 700,000 to 800,000 people, and that's a lot of constituents who voted for them. So
that's a very key issue. We've got a very young staff. We're committed to trying to develop the next generation of journalists covering Mississippi, government, politics, public policy. So most of my staff, we've got 10 reporters, and 8 of them are under the age of 28. They're learning. They're going out there. So Twitter and that kind of stuff, we have to constantly say, you got to be careful about the tone to that sort of thing. The other thing is we're only 13 months old. I'm gratified to see that while we had a few reporters that had their own contacts that would start feeding them info, now probably once a week we're getting something that just comes into our general info at MississippiToday.org, if I can get a plug for that, about, hey, here's a problem. And we're hearing from families who are having particular issues with state agencies. And, it's just wonderful the way we're being embraced, because we're covering issues that the other media, because of cutbacks and whatever, they don't have the staff or the time to get out there and do that. And so it's exciting to be able to go out again and cover those stories.
Terry, if anybody, because if anybody is a media elite member, it's you. So what's your Terry's been an editor and a reporter and
everybody likes
yes,
me.
Exactly.
Despite agreeing with just about everything that's been said, I find myself incredibly optimistic about where we are, and for this reason. The narrative that's been laid out about how horrible it's been through the campaign and how nasty it is on Twitter and on Facebook, the fact is, what you just heard at the end of the table is happening a lot. People understand that people who are doing good work are important, and it's suddenly, listening to the public response, people from California and around the country saying to people at the Washington Post, thank you for doing the work you do, and subscriptions being up, and at the same at the New York Times, and ratings being up. People get what we do, and the more they think about it and they see how kind of charred the landscape is, they kind of appreciate a little more the value of hard news, straight ahead, and unrelenting. I think that's the thing that they like the most, and that, I think, is what we have to continue to do. If there is a point of distress for me, and there is. It is the story you heard about the closed meeting. So you're reporting, you go, how could that happen? And it can happen this way. The people who are public officials today suddenly don't have the same kind of story about how this is supposed to work. And it is a reflection, in some ways, of what's happened to the country. We don't tell ourselves the same stories because we don't have to. And as a result, we start a conversation and we're talking about completely different things. It is bubble mania. I mean, everybody in their own bubble. And I think what we have to do now more than anything is try to kind of breach those and get people talking to each other. We just
Catherine,
don't subscribe to the same myths.
I agree with that very much, and I would also say that in addition to that, we have to do a better job collectively as journalism organizations and as journalists to showcase the numerous examples across the country of some really good, high-quality, responsible, investigative reporting that have actually made positive differences in communities all across America. I think of Brendan Keefe in Channel 11 in Atlanta, Scott Friedman at KLAX in Dallas, and there are many other examples of people who do really thorough, competent investigative reporting at the local level, which actually results in positive changes in laws and policies. The Brendan Keefe example I mentioned, he's done a lot of great work, another multiple Murrow Award winning journalist, but he discovered literally fatal flaws in local 911 technology in the suburban Atlanta area and documented the number of deaths and near deaths that occurred because of those flaws. And it wound up making a tremendous difference. The entire 911 system in that large metropolitan area has been revamped and improved because of his reporting, because of the fact that he brought that issue of tremendous local public concern to light. And I would also point, not in the electronic journalism area, but in the print area, Art and his Pulitzer Prize winning efforts have done a tremendous job to improve the quality of life in his community. And in addition to what Terry just said, we've got to make sure that we do a better job of highlighting those examples of outstanding journalism that actually make a positive difference in communities.
Catherine, do you feel, representing the Society of Professional Journalists, what are your members telling you? What do folks at SPJ meetings talk about? Is it more the downside, or are people getting more support?
I think there's a lot of fear out there. There's just a lot of fear about the atmosphere. If I could talk about the particular issue that SPJ has made a priority, over about the last 8 years, there have been efforts to deal with what we loosely call the censorship by PIO, which SPJ has been there with all the issues. You're right on the front lines with everything, but we've made this one of our priorities because news people don't talk about it publicly, and that gives it tremendous power. Now we're seeing a completely different atmosphere, but people have said to me about this thing, we have bigger problems now. Not really. I mean, for instance, this this culture of censorship that was built up, that was entrenched under the Obama administration, now belongs to President Trump and his political appointees. What we're talking about here is, it starts with forcing reporters to go through a PIO, a public affairs officer, before speaking to anyone. Well, that's straight off the bat, just shuts people up really good. And then it goes into things about monitoring conversations or blocking reporters altogether. Over the last few years, we've done 7 surveys. We led 53 journalism and other groups in a letter to President Obama. We went to the White House and talked to President Obama's press secretary, Josh Earnest. With the surveys find this all across the country. So the country's infused with this kind of censorship.
Can I ask the local journalists, are you seeing this? Are you seeing that people are more reluctant to talk to you, or do you think it's a better atmosphere at a more local level? Yeah, Jonathan.
Well, even, again, Congress, you could usually call people out and talk to them. A lot of them saying, call my PIO. I'm not going to talk to you. And you get messages, even people sometimes you cover regularly, even people you don't cover regularly. Call my spokesman. And you get that a lot more. There's much less willing to give a give and take, just on the fly. Everybody wants to think what they have to give you a statement. You don't have the same type of spontaneity that you used to have.
What about, go ahead, Abby.
Well, I would just jump in. I mean, I live in fear of my correspondence being dumped by the Russians or by, whoever. I mean, like, I'll be walking down the street and wondering, is anyone listening to this call? Because it's a sensitive thing. And so I do think there's a sense of that going around within Washington. But the interesting thing was I went back to my newsroom in Austin a month or so ago. And kind of the interesting thing is there's no national security apparatus in state government. So they just didn't have those sorts of crazy thoughts running through their head that I did. And so it was just kind of an interesting dichotomy where I was like, man, it's kind of fun to be in Austin right now. So,
has anybody at the table taken extra precautions, used any cybersecurity?
Who's got Signal? Okay.
Okay, what is Signal? All right, explain it, Terry.
Signal is an encrypted messaging app that you can set it so that the message disappears within whatever.
Like Mission Impossible?
Like Mission Impossible.
Cool. Does your phone blow up? Or?
I'll decide.
That's the next step.
So
Don't hold his phone.
I mean, part of what Abby just described is another interesting phenomenon. This really nasty argument we're having is really about, I think, Americans deciding that their politics is the essence of who they are, which didn't used to be the case. Art plays pool with people who disagree with him politically, but they have a whole other raft of things in common or not in common. They live in the same community. Well, they like the same pool hall. They probably drink different beer. And you have.
They like Bush Light.
That's not even
Bush
beer.
Light, man. That's where it's at.
That's not even beer. That's why you shouldn't be friends with them.
We're talking redneck here.
Now we are getting into serious journalism issues, and I want to point out that it was a Pulitzer Prize winner that brought it up. So, and we are at the National Press Club, which has a bar. Okay.
Where? This gets over about 11, doesn't it?
So
It's 11 o'clock
part of what happens when we do this kind of high-level national reporting is that it's so much about ideology and people who are just projecting and acting on ideology. And when you go cover the local school board meeting and the guy is going to vote against the mill increase, but you're going to see him the next day buying Bush Light, and you can say, why?
Why are you drinking Bush Light?
And so there's a sense of wholeness in local reporting. And even though I don't think you can avoid, I mean the other thing that's happening because the reason it's so nasty is in some ways the public, the politicians, they have some of the same tools that we have. We drive traffic on Facebook. Well, you drive traffic on Facebook, you're going to get the blowback on Facebook because everybody's got it. You tweet out your story, and the people who disagree with it, even before they read it, they're going to tweet back. And the less they know about the story, the less they read about the story, the nastier and better the tweet. So that's what we're living with.
And another large television company that we've heard from very recently regularly conducts focus groups in its local markets. And they always ask the question in these focus groups, how many of you think that one or more of your local television stations has engaged in fake news? And no matter where they are in the country, urban area, rural area, the heartland of America, Trump country, Elizabeth Bernie country, invariably at least 80% of the people in the focus group raise their hand and say yes. And then they try to do a deeper dive and say, well, what makes you think that? And invariably the answer to that question is, well, I read the real story on Facebook.
So I'm going to, there are question cards if you prefer, if you're shy and you want to write your questions on cards and pass them up to me, you can do that. Or if there are people who have questions, I see one gentleman here, we can bring mics over. We've got some folks around here, you can ask questions. But I just want to ask while people are queuing up for that, and we have a good representation of big papers, big news organizations and small. Is it kind of like Congress? You like your congressman, you hate Congress in general, but you like your congressman, so the more in your face, I guess, reporters can be, the better off we'll be with our communities? Go ahead.
I come from the 4th Congressional District in Iowa, and our congressman's name is Steve King. He is Louis Gohmert's kindred spirit. And no, I don't hate him. I can't stand Steve King. He's a bigot, in my opinion, and he is a xenophobe, in my opinion. And I haven't spoken to him since he got the Republican nomination for Congress about 16 years ago. He refuses to speak to me. And he said, I speak to my base. I don't speak to you. And that's when I got off on the wrong foot with him, was at a Republican nominating convention. I was a whore in church. And nobody would talk to me just because I was from a newspaper. And at that time, Steve King is from my hometown. And I know his mother. And we had been friends. But all of a sudden, he got the nomination. He says, this was 18 years ago. He basically says, you're an enemy of the people to me. And I say, fine, you're just going to give me fodder for the next 18 years. And that's what I've done. And so at the local level, they haven't been speaking to us forever. We've been dealing with, I mean, I don't talk to a congressman or a senator. We just, and you just go around them. You just get your information out. We don't need them.
Right, that's it.
All right.
I once told a congressman when he first got elected, I said, I don't need you to write the bad stuff. I can always find people to go after you. I need you to write the good stuff to tell me what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. But if they don't want to talk to me, that's fine. I don't need Steve King. Steve King is not going to sell papers for me. What's going to sell papers for me are those baby pictures and dog pictures. and so I don't need him. I don't need Donald Trump. We don't need Donald Trump. He doesn't need to be at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. We don't need a White House Correspondents' Dinner. And we've got to get out and fight. That's all there is to it. And I sit here and listen, and I'm saying, no, I'm not a media elite. I'm not creating fake news. But we get people even at our level saying, you know, this is fake news because you wrote a series of editorials that was critical of Monsanto and the Koch fertilizer, Koch brothers. And no, we're telling the truth, damn it. And if you hit me, I'm going to hit you back twice as hard. And if Steve King doesn't want to talk to me, then God damn it, I'll write what I think about Steve King. And I think if you get back to that sort of authenticity and truth-telling, then there's going to be no problem for American journalism. I've been thrown over a car by the mayor of a town of 500 people. I've been cited for contempt of court by a judge. I have been sued for libel, and I'm still here, and I'm still standing. And I'm a Democrat living in a Republican district with a bigot for a congressman, and God damn it, we're not going to shut up. And if we shut up, and if we say those congressmen can play games with us, and we don't call them out on it, then we deserve our own death. But I just got on my soapbox there. I'm sorry, but it gets to me.
And if anybody has the nerve to ask Art or any of us a question after that, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I always have nerve. I'm Andrea Edney. I'm with Bloomberg News, and I'm the vice president here at the club. And I'm really curious about whether practices in newsrooms are changing at all when you're training your young journalists to respond to, these allegations of fake news or media bias. Like, how do you address those in a practical sense with your publications, or do you not? Do you just say, okay, it's not true, we just move forward?
I'm going to quote my boss here, Marty Barron, who points out that the president really does some of his best work when he is engaged in battle, and in large part, what he wants, what he enjoys, is a fight. And he tries to draw people into fights. And Marty says, we're not at war with the president, we're at work. We are going to go to work every day and do that work. And I think the argument about whether you're doing fake news or not is a losing one, in that you're having a conversation on somebody else's terms. What is fake news? Once you're engaged in that conversation, you're already lost. And so I think what we do is, in some ways, the young people have more to teach about how to work on these platforms than some of us. What we have are really high standards, and like every generation of journalists, you try to transmit those to the newest people. But nobody's tweeting on Facebook anything that the Washington Post wouldn't have put in the Washington Post a few years ago. And it's a big place, bigger than it used to be. And there are a lot of people. And let me tell you, for a while, somebody would tweet something and the place would just be terrified. I think that's passed. People understand now that we have standards, you enforce them. And for example, I don't think anybody at the Washington Post responds to a presidential tweet when he tweets. You're gonna have to just.
I just want to jump in, though, and ask, because Art and Terry have just sort of expressed kind of the two poles, I think, of the reaction to what's happening now, and that is, if we just bear down and do our jobs, we'll prove ourselves. But is that enough? Is it enough? And I just ask that of the panels. When you're under attack like this, is it enough to just do your job and ignore the attacks? Or are you likely to become somebody like John Kerry, who said, I don't have to answer those charges against my Vietnam record because it's obvious that I was a Vietnam veteran? What is it enough?
Funded by the Koch brothers.
Is it enough to just do your job?
Terry.
I
have I've specialized in the federal agencies. It is unusual, I would say, that the Washington Post, along with the rest of us, gets much about FDA that FDA hasn't released. Frankly, I don't see any evidence that the Post and the rest of us are getting past the controls. And that's a human rights issue, because FDA is impacting all of us all the time.
We continue to try. There's no question that the big, sprawling federal agencies have, for a long time, over a period of time, as coverage of those agencies went away, that we were not getting and continue to not get all the information we want. So instead of a beat reporter talking to somebody every day and getting what you need, you end up with somebody going, we haven't seen this for 5 years, and then you file a Freedom of Information request, and that takes a bunch of time, and that there is a lot lost in the coverage trying to get to some of that information.
If I could come back on that, I definitely understand the resources problem, having lived with it all the time. But I think the fact that the agencies are controlling our access down to a T, it's exploding the resources issue, because what would have taken a 10-minute phone call for a reporter to get an entirely different picture of the issue will take 3 months investigation.
And lawyers, and yes, it's, I totally agree.
Right, and that happens at the state level too, because we have these, same thing. You go through the PIO only. The governor's staff in Mississippi won't talk to us since last September because we published census numbers showing that Mississippi, yet again, was the lowest median income in the nation. But it became an issue because the Republicans are now in power, and that's the only reason we're interested in this issue all of a sudden, they claimed. But so now they don't talk to us. So we work harder and go around and ambush the governor when he's out in public and ask him questions.
Well, one of the things you talked about in terms of the attacks, and some of it is just engagement. And I can't tell you how many angry emails I get, a lot more now than I did 20 years ago. Of course, it was an email 20 years ago, but a lot more.
You are an old fogey, so.
But a lot more recently, and I think a lot of it is due to Trump. Anything they disagree with is defined as fake news now. But I can't also tell you how many people, when I respond and I explain how, wow, I never thought anybody would respond to me. And just a simple thing like that, and explaining certain things. There's one incident, somebody got really mad at me because we didn't write the fact that the Maxine Waters from California, New Jersey newspaper, didn't write the fact that Maxine Waters, a California congresswoman, attacked Trump. And she said some terrible things in the person's opinion. And I said, well, she's from California, we're from New Jersey. And they said, yeah, but you covered Donald Trump. And I said, when Maxine Waters buys 3 casinos in Atlantic City and puts her name up there, I'll cover her also.
Questions? Hi. Is this on? There we go. Hi, my name is Shira Stein. I'm a journalist, student at American University, and I'm also interning with a publication called the Durango Herald out in Colorado.
Good for you.
Thank you. So actually, my internship consists of mainly covering the Colorado delegation in Congress for the local Durango audience. A lot of my classmates, including myself formerly, really focus on wanting to get to the national publications and are concerned about all of the press freedom issues that local journalists face. So how do I convince my classmates that local press is important and to go into local journalism and not to just try and go for the biggest thing right away?
What a fantastic question. Who wants to start? Fred, you've been or either of you,
Well, yeah, I just think the impact you have at the local level, it's more immediate and it's recognized locally almost immediately also. You can see that, oh, there's that contract is now public, that sort of thing. So, quick answer.
And I would just dovetail off of that and say it's not only easier is probably not the right word, but easier to make an impact at the local community, but it's easier to be recognized for that. And to build off of Kathy's congressional analogy a moment ago, everybody hates Congress but likes their own member of Congress. We see examples all over the country that everybody hates the media, but they have at least 1 or 2 local news sources that they really do trust and rely upon for information about their local community. So if you want to have a real impact, immediate impact, God bless the Washington Post, New York Times, and others.
Thank you.
They do a big expose, exposing the fact, by the way, I think it was the Times, Terry, that not the Post, but I could be wrong about that, exposing the fact that Signal can now be read by our national security apparatus. So it's not even as safe as many of us would like to believe. That obviously makes a difference and helps people. But when Art does his reporting, or Mississippi, there are reports that come out in Mississippi or in a local community done by a local journalist that can have an immediate impact that really matters to people and improves their lives.
And I would just add to that, to the impact fact, you're going to get so many, it's a local journalist on say a small Berkeley side type operation. You're going to write so much more. You're going to get so much more feedback from the community. You're going to get praise. You're going to be carried on that praise, because let's face it, the money is not going to be. If none of us are in journalism for the money. And I think the gratitude, the sort of feedback, that positive, and the ability to, as people are saying, do make real, genuine, impactful journalism is really, really valuable.
Here's the argument. You'll be a better reporter. And here's why. If you go to a city council meeting and the vote is 4-7, the 4 people who voted one way have to answer to a bunch of people in the room. You get to talk to those people. You get to construct a story that says, it's not just the vote, it's the guy from this neighborhood who is concerned about this for this reason. And suddenly you're thinking about the story in a completely different way, as opposed to a vote in Congress. I had an editor who used to say, you never really know how to cover a story until you cover a 2-car wreck where nobody dies. I was like, well, if nobody dies, why is it news? He says, because then you got to talk to people. And they lived. And then you have a story about what happened before that, what happened while it happened. And a car wreck changes your life. And you get to talk about that too.
If I may, I'd like to just add, I applied for a job at the Des Moines Register, and at one time I think only the New York Times may have won more Pulitzer Prizes than the Des Moines Register. They had 17 of them. And my heart was set on the Des Moines Register, the Minneapolis Tribune, now the Star Tribune. And first of all, I wouldn't be writing editorials today if I had gotten a job at the Des Moines Register. I'd be on the street. I'd be freelancing. I'm 59 years old. They would have fired me 5 years ago, which is what they've done in newsrooms across the country, especially at big regional papers like the Register and the Star Tribune. And there's a lot of action at the community journalism level, and I'm taking nothing. I think the Washington Post and the New York Times are in a golden era of journalism right now. I think they're doing as great a work as they did, or better than Watergate. They're big, they're muscular, they're telling stories across all forums. It's just incredible the work they're doing. But, community journalism, you have freedom. You direct your own destiny. I'm working with my big brother. It's the most fun you can have. Tom Knudsen won a Pulitzer Prize working for the Des Moines Register on famine in Ethiopia. And the New York Times immediately hired him and put him in the Long Island Bureau, and nobody ever heard from him again. So Storm Lake's pretty good. I'm still getting on the front page.
I'll just add one. I did sort of the opposite. I worked at NBC, CNN, and a Capitol Hill newspaper called Roll Call, and then I moved to the Washington version of Local. And I think one of the things to remember is the lesson from Michael Lewis's Big Short is the people who saw the financial crisis coming had something different about them, whether it was a disability or just a background difference from the rest of the people on Wall Street. And most of the reporters in Washington and New York talk to the same 100 or 200 people. And it's the same thing on Capitol Hill. And there's hundreds of members of Congress who don't get asked questions because nobody ever pays attention to them. And so if you can come to this with a different angle, different people you're talking to, and you can get that from the local experience, you will. I wrote a very incendiary article in 2011 about Ted Cruz might come in second in the Texas Senate race, and everyone thought it was nuts that I would even give him that much credit. Well, I had people down in Austin who were saying, well, I'm publicly for Dewhurst, but I'm secretly for Cruz. And so when you have that background of people different from who everyone else is talking to, that's where we get into groupthink.
Also, some of it, I said, I'm still talking to people now in Washington. I'm writing for a local audience, but I'm talking to people that I covered 40 years ago in the State House. I have the same sources, and they'll tell you things, so they build up this huge relationship with people. And so even start as a local reporter, you learn the people, you learn the issues. Sometimes you follow people up. Ron Fournier of the Associated Press, he was covering Little Rock, and this little governor you may have heard of called Bill Clinton decided to run for president. He was the national expert because he had covered him in Little Rock and was there when he lost and was there when he came back. So that's how you learn your stuff. And then if you want to get to Washington, you're the expert.
Bill Mccarran, you run this, you keep the trains running on time.
Not at the moment. I'm just listening, but those were really good answers. I would just say for the student, a practical answer is it's not an either-or question. So for TV, the reporters that are going to go to Wichita are going to come from Savannah. And so you don't, and then you're going to move up markets. And for newspapers, it's very unlikely for somebody to come out of college, go to the Washington Post and New York Times. It happens, but it's pretty odd, rare. So you start in local. If you love it, you stay in local. Maybe you stay till you're 59 and running your own paper. But you can move up. And so you shouldn't look at it as, which do I want to choose? Because really what you want to choose is local to start.
I think, I know we have tons of questions, but we're going to have to be quick. So, yeah, because we have another panel.
Testing 1, 2. Okay. Again, DJ Caulfield. I did go and serve as a journalist in the 70s, so I was among the group of the nattering nabobs of negativity. So if we recall, that's Spiro Agnew. So my question real quick is this assault on media a cyclical process? And, or if so, is this cycle different because of social media and the marketplace of ideas?
Yes, that is a fantastic question. I'm going to let everybody answer it, and then we're going to move off to the next panel.
Yes, and yes is the short answer to your question. And if I could just put in a very quick shameless plug, RTDNA is launching a Voice of the First Amendment task force, which will have a number of tentacles to it, all of which are designed to increase the public awareness of the positive aspects of journalism, defend journalism from attacks on the First Amendment, freedom of information requests and media access, and also work within the industry to help the members of the local and network news industries become better communicators at making their case to the American people as to why this attack is A, particularly dangerous, in part because of social media, and B, because as I said earlier, we work for you, meaning the public.
Anyone else?
Well, it's nattering nabobs of negativism, and the author of that, and the press was so upset over that they took the author of that phrase, William Safire, and gave him a prime op-ed column on the New York Times. Yeah. But we've seen it since Nixon, the idea of delegitimizing the shooting the messenger, right? That's what they're doing, only they're not shooting it, they're delegitimizing the media. And Trump is basically Nixon on steroids.
I think, and one way to look at it is, it feels completely new and more caustic than usual. But the truth is, we have, and we do important work. We have a certain amount of privilege, and part of that is you come under attack. But we keep going.
All right, I want to, just from the bottom of my heart, thank all the panelists. If this does not, this discussion doesn't make you want to go out and do journalism, I don't know what does. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back and talk about how to keep journalism going financially. And I'm going to ask Fred Anklem and Art, because Art is very low energy, as you can see, to stay on the dais, and then we'll bring up the rest of the panel. But just take a little break, and we'll forge on to our next discussion.
I'd like to thank everybody for being here on what is a very important day for, I think we all, most of us, I hope, if not all, agree, a day for our industry, our sector, our country, civil societies, democracies everywhere, and it's important to have this discussion, these ongoing discussions. You should have a sheet, but I will attempt to help with the identification of our panelists here. That also tells you who is whom. By way of introduction of myself, my name is Mark Hamrick. I'm here in my capacity as a former president of the National Press Club in 2011, where World Press Freedom Day was marked in the United States for the very first time in the ballroom across the way, and that was in the capacity of the sponsorship of the United Nations Foundation and the U.S. State Department, and I was proud to do that, and it was actually an important day in my life because I met face-to-face with people who traveled from other countries who faced security threats, and they told us that day how important it was for them that the United States and the Press Club and all of us make note of this important cause. We all probably wear more than one hat, so I'll acknowledge that as well. The other hats that I wear, I'm Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst for Bankrate.com, which is a leading personal finance destination. And as of Saturday, I became president of the Society of American Business Editors and Writers, having served on the board there. Our executive director, Kathleen Graham, is in the back, and glad to do that as well. So that explains my thinning hair, all of those hats. So thank you. Welcome to the National Press Club on this important day. As you know, we're trying to understand what works, particularly from a dollar sign or business standpoint, or what might work in the future. You might have seen data recently from the U.S. Labor Department. It was released last month. The number of newspaper jobs in the U.S. declined by more than half from 2001 to 2016, and that number went from 412,000 to 173,000. Among online news outlets, the government said that we had gone from 67,000, not the same beginning date. That one was started, they're setting that at 2007, 60,000 in 2007, to 206,000 last September. So that number more than tripled, while the other declined by more than half. It's also worth noting, for what it's worth, that CareerCast.com, and I can't vouch for the validity of the report, said that in its 2017 ranking of worst jobs, and it looked at data, newspaper reporter was at the top of the list of worst jobs with a median salary of about $37,000 and poor prospects for growth. It was followed by broadcaster with only a slightly higher median salary, meaning half or higher and half or lower, amid expectations of job losses there. Ad salesperson was also on the top 10 worst list, by the way. We also want to talk about some numbers because it's relevant to the panel today, that if you didn't see it, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting will be funded at a steady level of $445 million in the coming fiscal year. So this was another proposal from the President which did not muster the support of Congress. So for those of us that believe that there's an important role for public broadcasting, that is good news. So today we want to get an idea of the status quo as well as what is the cutting edge of media journalism and business models. Among those that we are holding over from the first panel is the 2017 Pulitzer Prize winner Art Cullen. He is editor and co-owner of the Storm Lake Times out of Iowa. That's a 3,000 circulation twice-weekly newspaper in a population, at least as reported to me, of 10,000, a market which is heavily Hispanic. Lance Noble co-founded Berkeley Side, which is described as a local paper without the paper. The trees appreciate that. It averages 750,000 page views a month with 220,000 unique visitors, for those of us that know the importance of those numbers. Fred Anklem, if I'm pronouncing that right, and feel free to correct me real time. Thank you. I even appreciate that more. Recently helped launch a nonprofit. While many traditional newspapers are shedding workers or closing, as we just noted, the nonprofit is Mississippi Today, where Fred is co-editor after spending 29 years at USA Today. So I understand that part of a team that won a Pulitzer at the Clarion Ledger in Jackson also. We have plenty of Pulitzer Prize winners in the house. On down the line, Andy McDaniel is Chief Content Officer at WAMU, which many of us are very familiar with and listen to on a regular basis here in the Washington, D.C. market, but of course they'll be the first to say you can listen to online. Out of American University, which is a top rated station in the market. Barbara Cochran, whom I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with many years. I like to say she has had an illustrious career going back to the Washington Star, including NPR, CBS, and NBC News. She's also a former CBS bureau chief here in Washington and now Washington director of the University of Missouri Journalism Program. And then we have Tom and Jan. Tom Glazer's director of the Public Square program with the Democracy Fund, which was created by eBay founder Pierre Omidyar. And Jan Schaefer from American University as well, as she is the entrepreneur in residence, which is, as I understand it, tell me again if I'm wrong, I'm part of the American University School of Communications News Startups. I get that about right? Set me straight.
I'm executive director of JLab. We fund
Okay.
startups. We have funded many startups, and I am entrepreneur in residence at American University, where I also teach.
Okay, very good. Well, see, we have to correct real time, which is like posting to the internet, so all that is good. So let's just throw it open. And Art, you were on the last panel. You're in a market, as I said, which is heavily Hispanic, and you have one note for tenacious reporting, impressive expertise, and engaging writing that has successfully challenged powerful corporate interests in the state. How is the business side of the enterprise going?
We live a life of genteel poverty. That median salary for newspaper reporters was a little high. And it's not the worst job in the world. It's the best thing you can do with your clothes on. And circulation revenue is flat to slightly declining, about a 2% circulation revenue decline per year. Not bad considering that 88% of our elementary school are children of color, and their parents, many of them, have only like a third-grade education in rural Mexico. So we're doing pretty well. We're starting to see Latino readers starting to subscribe to the newspaper. Advertising revenue has been flat. Insert revenue is up. We operate on about an 8% profit margin if we're lucky some years. We lost money for probably 20 straight years. I have uncashed paychecks in my desk drawer so we can cover payroll. And, but, you know, it's our paper. And we'll be there for another 50 years. We don't have much of an online presence. We do about $400 a month in revenue from our website, whereas we do about $22,000 a month in print advertising revenue. So print is still feeding the bulldog, and it will feed the bulldog for many years into the future, at least at the community journalism level, because you just can't put a Facebook picture on the refrigerator.
And
but I'd say revenues are flat. Expenses are we've been able to control expenses by living lives of obviously really genteel poverty, and I don't think that our profit margins are going to improve, and I don't think they're going to get worse.
Okay, well, so holding the line, so to speak,
Right.
if not better. And is that revenue stream reflective of the consumption preferences of your audience, meaning your audience doesn't really want to consume digital content relative to the printed paper?
We won't allow. We don't really allow. We don't allow people to get free news off our website. We demand that people pay for our news, and so the easiest way to do that is through the print product. You can order a replica online, but everything we do is focused toward the print edition because that's our unique selling proposition. It's in print, and it's not on Facebook. It's not on Twitter. It's not on a website. And so we make that into our unique selling proposition.
Interesting. Okay. So we mentioned Lance Noble has co-founded Berkeley Side, which is garnering a lot of traffic and attention, and obviously is one reason why he's here today. And I understand you went from a blog to 2 full-timers to several part-timers. How's it going?
It's going pretty well. Yeah, we founded Berkeley Side. I don't think we ever called it a blog, but we founded it because there was a lack of news coverage in our city. Berkeley is a city of 120,000 people. It obviously has a world-famous university. It has a very interesting political history, and it continues to have a very interesting political history. And we felt there was an enormous gap that needed to be covered. We do that. I think you've isolated Art and me at the end of the table because we're the two people who are trying to run a for-profit organization, and everyone who's in the nonprofit sector is further up the table. We make our money in three ways. We make our money through advertising, and that's going well. It keeps growing. We would love to have much more, but we're doing pretty well on the advertising side. We make money through events. We run an annual ideas festival called Uncharted, the Berkeley Festival of Ideas, and we think that gives us an opportunity to attract in ticket sales an audience that's from beyond our city, as well as sponsors from beyond our city. It will have its 5th year this year in October. And we make money from membership. Art said they make people pay for the news. We've taken the attitude, we don't make people pay for the news, but we allow people to pay for the news.
Right.
And what's remarkable, and Tracy in the previous panel talked about the trust our community has for us. I would extend it. It's beyond trust. A lot of our community adores us, loves us. We like art. Art's in genteel poverty. I sometimes quote Groucho Marx. I arrived in this city with absolutely nothing, and I've worked myself up to a state of extreme poverty. But our psychic rewards from Berkeley side are on a daily basis enormous. When I go to a cafe or walking the street, people honestly, Tracy, myself, Francis, our co-founder, people come up to us in the street and say, "Thank you so much for what you do. I didn't know what was going on in my city until you created Berkeley Side." So the psychic rewards are enormous, and we capitalize on that by asking people to become members. And we have about 1,200 members who pay an average of about $70 a year. We think, so that's 1,200 members is about 1% of Berkeley. We think we can get to 10% of Berkeley being members. But the most significant way, I think in terms of innovation, that we're trying to make this a going commercial concern is, and Jan at JLab wrote about this. Last year we launched what we're certain is the first direct public offering by a media organization in the United States. Probably aren't familiar with a direct public offering. It's a fairly unusual thing financially, but it's been around for a long time. It's a sort of aspect of financial regulation that allows an organization to offer shares directly to the public. You don't have to be a so-called qualified investor, which means a rich person, essentially. So we received a permit from California, from the state of California, to offer shares in Berkeley Side. And we are trying to raise $800,000 through our DPO. We're at about 530,000 now, and we're very confident we will get to that 800,000. And this money is providing us with the capital that we need to invest in Berkeley Side. We've already hired another reporter. We've redesigned the site. We've hired another salesperson. We're investing in marketing, particularly of our membership program. And it will give us that capital base. So, as with Storm Lake, we can be here for the next 50 years. Living month to month and putting payroll checks in the drawer and not taking any money out of it has been our situation for most of the 8 years of Berkeley Side. We think the DPO capital we're raising is going to provide us with that capital cushion, so it isn't a month-to-month existence. We can invest in Berkeley Side and we can have a confident future.
Okay, we can talk more about whether that might work for other people coming up. So Fred, you have, for those that don't know, some serious financial backing from the likes of Jim Barksdale, whom many of us remember was tied to Netscape, Andrew Lack, the chairman of NBC News, and Charles Overby, the former CEO of the Newseum. And I understand if most, if not all of them, have ties to Mississippi. So it's a nonprofit. How is the venture going, and what is the financial expectation of the venture?
Well, first of all, yes, I can't say enough about the backers that were already put in place before I contacted these folks about 2 years ago. They had raised a lot of money. They committed a lot of their own resources. They had both the Knight Foundation and the Ford Foundation had provided significant seed money to get us going. So Andy talked to the Texas Tribune folks, and what they told him is you need a long runway, which he gave us along with the other members of the board. So we had several years of funding going out, but we realize, and this is new, we're 13 months old. So we don't have 50 years, we don't even have 8 years, but some of the things that were spoken of there, similarly for us, we had an annual fund that we started. So we've already seen, for Mississippi standards, about 350 people sign up. It's been unique for me, coming from corporate Gannett to suddenly something like this, where I always plug MississippiToday.org in any appearance I make and remind folks that you can join our annual fund for as little as $10 a month. And these things build. We have just gotten a build grant from the Ford Foundation to bolster our financial side, our development side. So we just hired our first full-time development person. Probably should have had them 18 months ago, but we're seeing now. We can't wait till the money runs low or runs out. We have, because of the big financial support we had for starting, we have 10 reporters right now covering things all over the state of Mississippi. We have a person living and working in Clarksdale, Mississippi, as a bureau for us. So we're able to get out and do things, and we are seeing significant feedback from the public saying, hey, we love what you're doing. It's monetizing that love, which I think some of these other organizations have learned can be difficult. Love what you're doing, keep it up. We have to address that next stage, and we look forward to it. I think all of us are evangelists for what we're trying to do, which we call public service journalism. And there's a reason we don't ask you to subscribe. We give everything away for free. What's been remarkable to me is the collaborative nature of the nonprofit media sector. The Institute for Nonprofit News, they built our website for us. They run it for us. We went to the Texas Tribune and spent a day, and they told us every mistake they had made. And we're just trying to be a mini Texas Tribune, and we think that if you can do this kind of thing in Mississippi, you can do it anywhere. So we would like to be the model for the rest of the country, that you can have a statewide public policy, governmental politics-oriented news site that can thrive.
Do you shy away from anything that others might regard as trivial or, for example, entertainment news?
No, actually, what we found, this is Mississippi, so part of our thing is to cover Mississippi culture. So we have a full-time sports columnist who writes several times a week. We have a local kind of cultural publication, the SIP, which provides us content. And we go out and cover things ourselves, too, that are very culturally oriented. So we don't shy away from that. We were mainly focused on the government politics, but we understand our audience. That's all part of the thread of Mississippi. And you really, it's almost more important whether you're for Ole Miss or Mississippi State than whether you're for Trump or somebody else.
I guess we might wish that would be the case everywhere in some iteration. So Tom is here, and we'll get to him in a moment, but you mentioned the Institute for Nonprofit News, and from what I understand it, the Public Square Program and the Democracy Fund end up sending some money your way, correct? So how do you reach out to all those folks? I mean, you've got a lot to do. You got to worry about editorial, and you have to make new friends that you never thought you'd have to make before.
Right. That's why my hair looks like this. It's for me, at my point in my career, it's been a remarkably fun experience. I'm working with very young reporters, trying to bring 30 years of experience at USA Today to play in their work in reporting. At the same time, learning how to sit down with approach. So, for example, we sat down and talked with the Walton Family Foundation. They are funding that reporter in the Delta specifically to do education writing, which is one of our core values. We are working with a local foundation to try to help fund and set up an internship program with the state, through the state universities. So to me, I find it invigorating. I love journalism. I'm 40 years this month a journalist.
Congratulations.
And what I love, thank you, and what I also married to my wife for the same time period. Stacey.
Not necessarily in order of importance, we might be quick to add. I saw the reaction, it wasn't
I've been
good.
knocked on the head for not introducing
understood,
you previously.
yeah.
But anyway, you know, what I love about this is the young people still committed to the values we all share and have spent our lives doing. And on World Press Freedom Day, I have to salute my staff.
Absolutely.
They
Absolutely.
are just great to work with.
Well said. So to my right, your left, Andy McDaniel, the Chief Content Officer of WAMU. How does your funding get provided?
Mostly from individuals.
Speak
Sure.
to that if you can.
Mostly from individuals. So about half of our funding comes from individual members. The next biggest chunk is from underwriting. So that's this program is brought to you by viewers like you, if you will. And we also do some major grants as well, but that's a much smaller chunk. So the biggest chunk is individual giving.
And so I referenced earlier the federal component of that. How reliant are you on that?
Very little. Less than 5% of our overall revenue comes from CPB, which is great for us. And hey, we live in a big metropolis and have a very public radio predisposed audience. That isn't the case, of course, for a lot of rural stations. The typical rural station gets about 25% of its revenue from CPB. So we're in tricky territory right now in that we have a much bigger audience that we might leverage to bring attention to the threat of losing funding, and yet it's much less critical for us than it is for smaller stations that don't have the same type of megaphone.
Mm-hmm. And how are you attempting to differentiate your product from everything else that's out there these days?
It's interesting. I think, moving to Washington, D.C. in this moment, which I did a little under 2 years ago, it's a funny thing because this is a city that is so perceived to be so federally oriented. It is federally oriented. But WAMU has a pretty unique approach in that we are one of few entities with our eyes specifically on the regional landscape. So just to give you one example, something we launched just a few months ago in association with a major event you might recognize is a project called The Trump Effect. And The Trump Effect focuses specifically on the regional impact of the new administration and the way that it's changing Washington, Maryland, Virginia in ways that have to do with the arts, that have to do with dating. We see it as what
does that mean exactly?
Well, you'll have to listen to the story, which is available at WAMU.org.
A lot of pitches today, aren't we? Yeah, it's all good.
So, we're focused on the region,
Okay.
and we obviously are plugged into National Public Radio. We're offering that too as well. We have our own national programming, but what differentiates us is our coverage of the region. And that's something that we're working on offering not just through the individual news reports that we do, but also weaving it in subtle ways throughout our programming, which I think is relevant to the conversation about funding because you may have heard on our air, we have a project called Capital Soundtrack where we shifted all of the music that we play in our breaks from sort of elevator music, free-for-all, to specifically local tracks. And it's just the subtle way in which we've been able to say when you tune into our station, you're not listening to an individual podcast a la carte, you're listening to our station, you feel a sense of place. And I think that's what gets back to this question of sort of monetizing the love, as you put it, and that among
But
a lot
that's
of...
not connected to the dating thing, right? That's different.
No, that's... monetizing that love is a lot tougher.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
That's all good. What's your commitment to news or news-related programming in terms of staffing now versus in the past? In terms of personnel or money spent, et cetera?
Right.
honestly, it depends on how far past you go. I can, excuse me, I can sort of share the trajectory since I've been there. So for the last 2 years, we started out with a footprint of about 15 people in our regional news area. We've grown that to 21, and over the next 4 years, we want to grow it to 60, which is extraordinary in terms of the multiplication factor and the funding that will be required, but isn't extraordinary when it comes to being on par with other public radio stations around the country. So we've had sort of an itty-bitty newsroom for such a major market, and that's something that we're looking to change.
Okay. So let's just keep the AU theme going. Jan, tell us what you do, first of all.
I raise money to give it away, and raise money from many big journalism foundations to help fund hyperlocal startups, women media entrepreneur startups, encore entrepreneur startups. But I don't have to do that anymore, in part because media entrepreneurship on its own is at an all-time high. And we are seeing hundreds and hundreds of news organizations starting up in communities across the country. They generally land in 5 buckets. You'll get a hyperlocal site, often they're mom and pops, usually they're for-profit, they try to sell ads. You get statewide initiatives like Mississippi Today and the Texas Tribune that are mostly nonprofits. You get a lot of niche sites starting up. They're covering what are now media deserts, arts and culture coverage, which has disappeared, education coverage, public schools, sustainable cities, health, a lot of health sites. Then you get mission-driven sites that happen, like the Marshall Project, which cover a lot of social justice issues. And then you get kind of the big venture capital funded sites, like Vice and Vox and BuzzFeed, which are now at unicorn level. They're approaching more than $1 billion in valuation, which is just astounding. So as you have all this hand-wringing about how are we going to pay for our journalism, people are doing it just fine. I mean, the hyperlocal sites can operate, and many are, on annual operating budgets of under $70,000 a year. It's really, low budget numbers. The statewide accountability sites generally tend to run, you've got New Jersey Spotlight, Vermont Digger, Wisconsin, Nebraska Watch, on and on and on. They're running at about $1 million plus a year. And you've got the big sites like Center for Public Integrity, or Reveal, or ProPublica, that are operating on annual operating budgets of more than $10 million a year. So they have to raise this money every single year to meet payroll and to make their staffs going. So it's become a time where it's not just the truth that counts, it's the trust that counts, and the relationship that you establish with whether it's your donors, your members, your advertisers, your clients, however your business model is working. There are many ways to do it. And I think we're finding that some of the best innovation is happening with Berkeley Side's DPO and things like that. It's happening in this media entrepreneurial space.
Okay.
I'd share Jan's optimism about the sort of volume and level of entrepreneurship and sort of new activity and innovation. I'm not sure I'm quite aligned on her optimism about kind of making it work. We're very, very familiar with a lot of the independent local news sites around the country, and particularly the mom and pop or the man and his dog kind of sites. It's okay in some communities, $70,000 a year or something like that. You can maybe get by, but burnout is a real issue for those people. And one of the things we did, rightly or wrongly, with Berkeley Side from the outset is we decided our reach would exceed our grasp, and we at a very early stage hired a full-time reporter. The 3 founders were all journalists, but we hired a full-time reporter who would be, and that it forced us to raise our revenues, but it also meant we weren't paying ourselves for a very long time. But that was with the long term in mind, to build an organization where we weren't, sometimes we think we are killing ourselves, but we're not endlessly driving ourselves into the ground because there's just no room to breathe or grow. And I think a lot of the entrepreneurial organizations are kind of coming up against those limits.
Okay, well, we'll talk more about the sustainability in a moment. And by the way, we need to remind ourselves of the theme of this panel, which is making evidence-based, unbiased journalism economically sustainable. And part of the question inferred in those two responses was, is it economically sustainable, and what models are? So, there was an intention here to sort of set up the micro and go to the macro. So, Tom, you can maybe just offer your thoughts in general and perhaps just react to what you've heard, given the fact that obviously you're trying to make sure that the targets of your funding are sustainable, right?
Yeah, no, thank you, Mark. And I'm honored. I've got to say, just start this off by saying I'm honored to be on this panel. I have never been a journalist, and I'm not trained as a journalist. And on a day such as today, World Press Freedom Day, as Kathy reminded us earlier, it's important that we think about journalists who are locked up, including the gentleman from Mexico on the border. Sustaining that sort of journalism, both locally and nationally, is clearly a big task with the layoffs we've seen across the board. I'm lucky enough to work at the Democracy Fund, which is a young foundation, and with our partners at First Look, we've managed and been able to provide $12 million of support to a small set of the nonprofit newsrooms, and also the Reporters Committee works on press freedom issues. But that's really only part of our work. It's very much around sort of how do we create sustainable models, and working with people like Jan and Barbara and others, sort of exploring what we can. If there are sort of three things for me that lie at the heart of this, is news outlets being relevant to their audience. They have to be trusted, truthful, and engaged. Without that, they are not going to maintain or acquire the subscriber revenue or membership to replace the advertising dollars that have been lost. They've also, I think, for me, got to be very aware of the media ecosystem in which they sit. It's not just about the print, the online. It's about social and Facebook as much as anything else. And knowing where the outlets sit in this ecosystem and recognizing what power and influence and ways to acquire money that leaves them is incredibly important. So collaboration, rather than this sort of standalone perspective, I think is critical. And some examples of that, I mean, in terms of a really exciting example that we've been lucky enough to support is Mary Brown's work, the Voice of San Diego's News Revenue Hub, launched in November, and has raised more than $1 million for the 5 members, the 5 News INN members who are part of it. It's $1 million in 5 months. The report that came out yesterday from the American Press Institute, which talked about 52% of news consumers do actually pay for news. And curiously, they think they're paying not enough. So there's sort of, this is not going to be easy to solve. We've got to inculcate this sort of practice of paying that WAMU has done over decades. And the news outlets that are often mom and pop nonprofits that are surviving day to day have got to find space to learn how to do this. But there is something quite exciting. And just to make a plug, since everyone else is, we released a report yesterday, Pathways to Engagement, which really is a taxonomy and list of some of the most interesting experiments that are out there. You wouldn't think of journalism as a comedy show, but the Center for Investigative Reporting turned its report on toxic waste spills in New Jersey into just such a piece of journalism that
it does seem like a punchline waiting to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's sold out. It's really, we've got to be thinking that creatively and looking to the audience as part of this. So.
Okay. So Barbara, I mentioned earlier about, your substantial career, which has provided you with direct insight into how many of these enterprises work, and yet on a day-to-day basis, you're working with students who are trying to figure it all out. So as you hear about all these models and you're trying to communicate that to the students, what are your reflections as you hear all this?
Yes, thank you, Mark. And it's really nice to be here. And as the president of the National Press Club Journalism Institute Board, I want to give a real shout out to our Press Freedom Fellow, Kathy Kiley, for organizing this. And thank everyone for coming. We really appreciate it. The University of Missouri actually has been doing something in this area for 108 years because Missouri has the first journalism school in the world. And its founder, Walter Williams, who was a newspaper editor in Missouri, decided that the best way to teach students was by having them learn by doing. And so he came up with the Missouri method. And that method says that students work in professional newsrooms reaching the community that they serve. Well, Columbia, Missouri, where the journalism school is located, is now a city of about 110,000 people with lots of complex businesses and social issues, educational issues, all kinds of things going on in that community. And the Missourian, which was the very first of these learning newsrooms that founded at the journalism school, has been around all this time. It's now transformed into a digital first publication, but it still puts out a print copy to its subscribers 3 or 4 days a week, and is still going strong and giving students a chance to cover beats and to learn alongside professionals how to serve a community, very different from working on a campus newspaper. But that's now been supplemented over the years by an NBC commercial television affiliate, a NPR member station, websites devoted to statewide coverage of Missouri business, a magazine that's distributed with the Missourian on a weekly basis, and I'm probably leaving some out that there are more, including an ad agency and a research arm that specializes in understanding young consumers. So students get to work in these public-facing journalism enterprises, and it's a great experience for them and helps them, equip them to go into newsrooms in the future. And there, I must say that students are getting hired, they're going into all kinds of different things, and some of them are very much like what we've been hearing about here, but some of them are community newspapers. And had a very interesting experience with my students in the fall semester. Students come here about a dozen every semester. They work in internships around town. Some of them get hired on and do stay in Washington. And a lot of them aspire to do that. Well, the results of last year's election were so startling to our students as well as most of the public. And we talked a lot about it right after the election. And the students realized that some of what had happened was that there has been this great drying up, hollowing out of journalism in the middle of the country. And that the people who were voting a certain way in this election were depending on local journalism that just isn't as robust as it used to be. Smaller staffs, less circulation. And so the competition, where are people going for their news about politics? They're going to national services like cable news, which you know, let's face it, is often a bunch of competing talking heads yelling at each other. They're going to their social media networks where they see whatever it is their friends want to recommend to them, and they're not getting that kind of information that's critical to understanding a democracy. And so my students, as shaken as they were by how the election turned out, and I'll say that very honestly, they all made a resolution that they wanted to return and work in community journalism because they wanted to help strengthen what was going on. And I'm happy to say out of that class of 12, at least a half a dozen of them are now working in communities of varying sizes, doing really significant local journalism.
Well, I really appreciate you making that point because it was one I wanted to make sure that we got to. And there are a couple of things that are tied to that, and I think probably a number of the panelists probably has some views on this question. When I mentioned those employment statistics at the outset, obviously it favors online journalism. It just so happens I was in the state of Kansas last month speaking to the Kansas Press Association, and a question came from a long, well-established newspaper where, in a state where there's no metropolis per se. One woman said, "What assurance can you give me that people are going to support our business in a way down the line that will make sure that we stay in business?" And the answer was, "I cannot give you that assurance," right? So what is the likelihood that rural America, and which can vote, is well served by the whatever outlets emerge or are sustainable in the future? Does anybody have an opinion about that?
So could you restate that, please?
In other words, what is the reasonable expectation of a resident of rural America that they'll be well served by the media and journalism industry in the future?
They can be guaranteed they will be served well by the media in the future. Iowa has 280 newspapers, all right? Everybody in Iowa reads a community newspaper. Everybody does, unless you can't read. And I disagree to a certain extent with Barbara's comments about lack of coverage in the heartland about Trump and the Republican sweep of the country. You couldn't get away from it in the Des Moines Register or the Quad City Times or the Minneapolis Star Tribune. So I disagree to a certain extent with that. But I think the key is that if we're telling compelling stories, we're going to be there. My brother started this newspaper because he said, we'll just build a better mousetrap and the world will come to your door, and 4,000 subscribers did in the first month. So if you're out there reporting hard and you're doing interesting stories and you're kicking butt, you're going to build circulation. We've been a little lazy lately in Storm Lake. John and I are both getting a little old, and we're not as aggressive as we used to be, and as a result, circulation slipped, I think. I don't blame it on Twitter or Facebook. I blame it on us being too lazy, me and John not getting off our butts and working. And that's the problem. You got to get out there and work and do the work. And I also, as the token print representative here, before this closes, I'd like to say that I think print is the future, and whether anyone wants to believe it or not, but print, the Minneapolis Tribune puts out a Sunday paper that is big and fat, you can barely lift it, and they're growing print circulation on Sunday. And so I've heard very little today about using print in combination with digital products to build a really tremendous community journalism product. And so I think those are all things that I think about.
Tom, let me butt in here. Tom, most of us are fans of Marty Barron, who's the executive editor of the Washington Post, if we all are not. He delivered a speech recently where he talked about, as I recall, dozens of congressional districts which are essentially not having regular coverage of the representative. Doesn't that stand in the way of having a vibrant democracy, despite what optimism was just expressed about print in rural America?
I will, like many in this room, agree with Marty Barron here. We are deeply concerned about this, and to get at that question, we've actually commissioned a whole bunch of research. I think next Monday There'll be a sort of census of news outlets and news workers per capita by state released. We've also commissioned a research covering 100 mid-level cities across the country that will identify the amount of news, the number of news stories per sort of local news topic, to really understand what's happening. I think the anecdotal evidence that is more than likely supported by some of this is that news workers, journalists are going to the coasts, and we have less than adequate coverage in other places. And I think it's a curious
Can
sort
I
of...
just add one thing to
Yeah.
that? When we talk about income inequality in the United States, it also occurs in media.
Yeah.
Right? Because one of the reasons why those people are going to the coast is because they don't want to make a life that might be described as poverty.
Yeah, no, and I think we're in this sort of transitional moment, and it's from my vantage point, there's no guarantee how we're going to come out of this. How we are going to come out of this by virtue of the innovation that Jan talks about, by virtue of the partnerships that Barbara talks about. Speaking of the coast, but Berkeley's investigative reporting program yesterday or the day before announced that it's built a partnership with Amazon Video with a first look, sort of anything they produce in terms of journalism, Amazon gets a chance to turn it into a documentary sort of effort here. And it's going to require all of those things, all of that sort of innovation and serving the audience appropriately. I mean, I completely understand Art's point around print in his community. When you look at the young people who I sort of have in my team, print isn't going to cut it. It's not going to be the future for them. They're going to get their news through some sort of social feed. And we have to rebuild the relationship between the audience and the public as we do that. So.
Okay, thank you for that. Do you have anything to say, Kathy? Okay. Okay, well, I want to make one announcement that I was asked to make, and that is there'll be another event at 5:30 this evening here in the club. The Gold Zaire Prize, do I have that correct? Okay. Will be awarded to top 10 journalists for coverage of American Muslims. So that's here in the club and the Zinger Room. So you can never get enough material about World Press Freedom Day. So we hope that you'll be available to take part in that. So obviously this is a conversation that continues. I want to thank everyone for being here today and for your passion and knowledge and investment that's not just financial in this important topic. And thank you for being here.
Nice to meet you.